All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're joined right now by Bill Kristol, editor-at-large of the Weekly Standard. Hello, sir.
Steve, how are you?
I'm doing well. Good to talk to you as always. All right, so let's get right to what seems to be the news of the day. Of course, Sally Yates is testifying today. We'll get to that in a second. But what we learned, the breaking news, the big news, the extraordinary news was that President Obama, in his meeting 2 days after the election in November with Donald Trump, told him something to the effect of don't bring General Flynn into your administration, or I don't like General Flynn, or I'm not high on General Flynn, whatever. And now the media is making it sound like, oh my God, how did he go against that warning? So I know you tweeted out about this, which we'll get to in a second, but what's your take on this whole thing?
I mean, President Obama's entitled to recommend to President-elect Trump that General Flynn didn't have the temperament or whatever. Obviously, Obama had fired him and didn't agree with him. Flynn had been a vociferous critic of President Obama's foreign policy. So it just seems to me, I mean, I'm not critical of Obama for saying it. The idea that they would leak it out this morning, though, in conjunction with the Yates testimony to somehow show that Trump ignored Obama's warning. There's no evidence, and no one's saying that President Obama warned him that that Flynn had illegitimate contacts, presumably with the Russians or whatever. That would be, interesting if true, but that there's no evidence of that. So the general warning against Flynn, that doesn't really count for much.
So what do you think about the timing? What are they trying to accomplish by leaking it out with the willing media, of course? Yeah,
I think what they're trying to do is, of course, elevate Yates' testimony this afternoon. We'll see what she really has to say, but I don't know. I think a lot of this, look, I mean, I think Flynn was a foolish appointment. I give Trump credit for seeing that. Maybe we just got lucky and he was forced to see it because he misled Vice President Pence. I think McMaster's a much better national security advisor. I'm pretty optimistic about him as national security advisor, but this is the problem with the liberals. There are plenty of legitimate things they can criticize, in my opinion, about Donald Trump or about Republican policies, but there's so much in their own bubble. They think that the fact that President Obama might have said something to Donald Trump 2 days after the election about a man who'd been so critical of President Obama that Trump should have taken that advice is just childish, I think.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And of course, Yates, who's going to testify, Donald Trump tweeted out earlier and said, why don't you ask Sally Yates under oath? Of course, she's the former Deputy Attorney General in the Obama administration, who was fired by Trump subsequently in his administration. Why don't you ask her how classified information got into the newspapers? Do you think he has a point?
Yeah, well, I'm sure some Republican will, or maybe even a Democrat will ask that. I think a lot of the times with Trump, though, he can't resist the showboating. Now when that question gets asked, now if you're a Republican senator, do you want to look like you're just kind of taking orders from Trump? I mean, it would have been better to have someone in the White House quietly call someone on the senator's staff and say, I think this would be a legitimate question. I think it would occur to the senators anyway, frankly. But Trump, this is where Trump kind of hurts himself by just, it's also, everything with Trump is on the surface, it seems. He doesn't seem to have the concept of doing a few things behind the scenes and then letting them play out.
Let me ask you, Dianne Feinstein the other day answered a question from Wolf Blitzer rather bluntly, and Wolf was very disappointed. It was obvious in his face and his demeanor, I think. But nonetheless, he asked if she has seen any evidence of collusion between Trump, the campaign, and Russia. And at this late date, she said no. I mean, I think that speaks volumes.
Maybe we'll see what the inquiry shows. I mean, Russia clearly was up to no good. Whether anyone in or around the Trump campaign had any, inappropriate contacts with the Russians, as opposed to the normal contacts one might have with diplomats from a foreign government or business interests, even that's hard to say. I don't think Manafort, Stone, some of those guys had, certainly dealt more with creepy Russian friends of Putin than one would have liked, but. That certainly doesn't prove collusion, as you say.
All right, let's move to the French election.
Yeah.
You know what I really love before we get to the results? Like after the polls showed that Le Pen was getting trounced, that's when Barack Obama aired his commercial supporting her opposition, who obviously won by big amounts. I'm surprised today the big story isn't Obama supported him and he won. They're smart enough not to go there, but I thought that's what they were setting us up for. Nonetheless, what's your take on the not only the victory, but the huge victory?
Yeah, I mean, Le Pen comes from such a fringe party. It is the most votes that party's ever gotten. So if you're worried about that party, it's kind of amazing that 35% of the people would vote for her. I think she's a pretty disreputable candidate. I mean, not like Trump in the sense that Trump was the nominee of one of the two major parties, and even though people like me certainly weren't for him, most Republicans, of course, fell in line. They thought, maybe correctly, they'd get a Republican administration, good Supreme Court picks, and all that. Le Pen would be as if Pat Buchanan were running as a fourth party, and suddenly made the final if we had a runoff system. So I wasn't that surprised. Chris Caldwell, who follows us for us, had always thought she'd have trouble getting above 40%, and she was short of that. I mean, I think I'd say two things. The populist, sentiment around the world is real and shouldn't be dismissed just because of this one result. On the other hand, there are also an awful lot of voters who are much more centrist, pragmatic, worried about some of the populist fanning of resentment and some of the populist policies, and they count too. There's a little bit of a trope on the right that sort of the real Americans, who vote for Trump count, and the other ones who voted for Clinton don't. But of course, they all count, and there are a lot of pragmatic, centrist people in Europe and in America. We can argue whether they're really pragmatic or whether the policies work or not, but that's kind of where they're inclined to be. So, I mean, the key thing is, can Macron shake up the economy a little bit and get the youth unemployment down from 23% or whatever? And, I don't know how much. He doesn't really have a party behind him. He's an independent.
Right.
It's as if a Bloomberg-type candidate had won, in America. Can he actually bring in some decent policy changes? I have no idea.
So let me ask you about how this is this a foreshadowing of what we could see, even though, again, as you just described, he's an independent, but is this good news for Angela Merkel in Germany?
Yeah, I think the European elections in general seems like they're pulling back. They may not love the EU. They certainly don't. They don't like a lot of things about their elites and their governments, but they're scared of the alternative, honestly, and maybe they're right to be. And so I suspect it's pretty good news for Merkel.
Okay, let me throw something at you here. There's been a lot of talk lately, and you've been doing a lot of the shows, and I know that this stuff comes up. You being a white male, me being a white male. Andrea Mitchell, just for one, the other day was talking to Secretary Price, HHS Secretary, about you have white men cutting health care for women. And we've seen the celebration, if you will, after the House passed the bill, as they coalesced around the microphones. That the media is focusing on this now as, look at all the white men, white men, white men. I mean, when did it exactly become fashionable to speak in a derogatory nature about white men just by virtue of pointing them out, that they exist, that that's who they are? It's a negative?
I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, I guess. It's got a little worse maybe recently. The one point I would make about that, I mean, look, it's all idiotic in my view. In general, people should be judged by what they say, what they think, and how they perform, not by certainly the color of their skin and not usually by gender. But these are elected officials. So what are people saying? That if the voters choose, in some cases, a white male, presumably white females, black females, Latinos voted for or against these people. They won an election. I mean, it's a little bit bizarre to say. I mean, no one, HHS Secretary Price or President Trump didn't select those people, right? Those are elected officials in those photos.
Right.
So I do think there's something a little anti-democratic about it. I mean, those are the representatives of the people of the United States. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. Now, let me ask you a couple more real quick, but it's the same topic, basically. I read today where Kamala Harris, the Democratic senator from California, who's been there for 4 months, is already being considered, or they're talking about her possibly running for president. She dropped the F-bomb over the weekend while criticizing the Republicans' health care bill. She's an elected official, so she's in a category by herself. But combine that with the head of the DNC, Perez, who has had a hard time not cursing when he talks at rallies. Bill Maher, just the other day on Friday night, accused or mimicked, and I hate to even say this, mimicked Ivanka Trump performing a sex act on her father. You, of course, had Stephen Colbert saying all the horrific things about Donald Trump in his mouth that he said. And, of course, Rosie O'Donnell, who you'd expect it from, at the GLAAD Media Awards, mock tweeted out on stage, F you, Donald, but, of course, the full word. What is going on here?
I do think Trump is causing kind of a meltdown on the left. I would distinguish, just per our previous comments. I mean, the comic character, what do they call comedians? I guess let's call them Hollywood types. they can say what they want, and they're not held to the same standards, obviously, as elected officials or maybe the head of a party. I think I'm not prudish about this, but honestly, the Senator Harris comment or Chairman Perez, that's not really. Well, if I were a Democrat, just a normal, guy who happened to be liberal and had voted Democratic in the last few elections, I don't think I'd be very proud to have leaders of my party saying that kind of thing. And in general, they really are betting everything. They're staying on Hillary Clinton's path in the sense they're betting everything on Trump just blowing up, being totally disqualified. There being no other alternative, presumably for the Republicans, and they're just going to win everything. And that's what Clinton did. It's a little risky. Where is the positive Democratic alternative? So you see a Democratic senator on TV, like on health care. I'm not a huge fan of the Republican bill, but you see a Democratic senator on TV, what are their proposals to fix Obamacare? Because they acknowledge that there are big problems. What are their proposals to reform the tax code? They really decided they don't have to do anything. They may be right for an off-year election. You could just get an anti-Trump, anti-Republican sentiment and more enthusiasm on the left and get a decent result for the Democrats. But I think it's very risky when a political party is so utterly negative in every respect.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Bill, always great to talk to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. Be well.
Bill Kristol, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you all for being out there and watching on Newsmax TV, newsmaxtv.com, and newsmax.com.